Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. I'm Ray, What Ray Reads. Follow me on Instagram and TikTok because why not? Today I thought we'd do a bit of a reading check-in and I'll share all of the books that I've read so far this year. I spotted Carly doing this and I'm always sat and invested when she does anything book related because I was their OG from the beginning. Plus I'm a notoriously nosy person, so I love knowing what people have been reading, watching, etc. etc. I've read some fantastic books this year. I've read some new favourites. I've discovered some new favourite authors. I've been in my audiobook era. I always set my reading goal for 50 because it's achievable. It's almost a book a week and I just think it's a good base. So if I read any more, then it's a win-win. I'm never going to be someone who can read 100 books a year. She's a slow reader. I'm just not someone who can read that quick. So this is your reminder, whether you read 1 or 100 books, you're a reader and it's not a race. We're just here for the love of reading. So with that being said, let's get into the books. So I've read 34 books so far this year. I'm on track to complete the 50 books on my reading challenge. Usually I end up doing a couple more, but we'll see how it pans out. I don't know if I'm going to get into a reading slump like I just have been. So these are a mixture of audiobooks and physical books. I've been so good at not buying a lot of new books this year. I've been using the library a lot more. Big up the libraries. And yeah, I'm proud of myself for not buying loads of new books. So the first book I read was Flicker in the Dark by Stacy Willingham. I listened to this on audiobook. This is a psychological thriller, use that term loosely, following a psychologist whose life's turned upside down when she's pulled into a series of murders in her town that are eerily similar to murders that happened 20 years previous when she was younger, and the perpetrator of those crimes was her own father. But he's been in prison for 20 years. So who is it? I found this book to be okay. The premise is a lot stronger than the payoff. It was less thriller and more character study. I didn't hate it, I just found it a little bit flat and it didn't really add anything new to the genre, but it was okay. The next book I read was The Coworker by Freida McFadden. This is the year, I don't know why, but I read about 4 Freida McFadden books. I don't know why. Obviously I wanted to see what the hype was about and then they're also easy to read. So I started with The Coworker. This was also on audiobook. Set in an office, we follow Dorn, an unusual young woman who's considered a bit odd. She's a bit of an outsider in the office. It's very heavily implied that she may be on the spectrum, and as the story unfolds, we get the impression that she's been getting bullied by one of her co-workers. So when Dorn disappears one day, she's the prime suspect. This is twisty and fun. I picked this up on a whim, but it ended up being a lot more enjoyable than I expected. It's definitely one of her better books, and it's a great choice if you want something easy and quick. And I thought the central character added something a bit different to the genre of like psychological thrillers. And one thing about Freida is she's going to churn out the books. The next book I read was Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, another audiobook. Set largely in a reform school in 1960s Jim Crow, Florida. We follow Elwood, a young boy who was at the wrong place at the wrong time and was sent to the reform school. And the story follows the daily horrors of what the young boys are subject to at the reform school at the hands of the often racist, abusive guards. But at the centre of it is the bond and friendship that they rely on and form with the other young boys there. Switching between past and present, we follow how their bonds really impacted them and the trajectory of their lives, and it's inspired by a real life reform school in America and sheds light on America's dark history, injustice and how we can't outrun our trauma. I adored this book. It was very moving and impactful and I highly recommend it. The next book I read was Perfume and Pain by Dorn. Set in contemporary Los Angeles, we follow a lesbian author who wants to write the great queer novel, and we essentially follow her messy life as a 20-something. Her career's on the rocks. due to almost being cancelled, and her love life isn't any better either. This was a breath of fresh air. It was fun, it was flawed, it was just a very compelling character, and I had a great time with this book. The next book I read was The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. This was another audiobook, a literary thriller that follows the disappearance of two members of the same wealthy family in a small town, decades apart. What's revealed is the dark secrets that the family can't outrun. I enjoyed this one a lot and found the pacing really added to the suspense. I listened to this on audio, but I highly recommend reading the physical book because we have different time periods and characters, so it jumps about a lot. So I did get a bit confused at times and had to keep checking what era we were in. So if you're going to read this, pick up the physical book. The next book was Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. If you're not new here, you know that I adored this book. We follow a young boy named Demon who is born in rural Appalachia, and he's born into poverty and addiction. The whole story's told from his point of view. We follow his hardships, his losses, and how he ends up in the care system and essentially has to rely on himself from a very young age. And we also follow how addiction infiltrates families and carries on throughout generations, and you really learn to grow with Demon and you just want to protect him. It's a reimagining of Charles Dickens' David Copperfield, but you don't need to have read that to enjoy the story. I'll never shut up about this book. I was deeply moved by it. I'll continue to recommend it to everyone, including you. And I don't think I've ever felt so strongly or deeply for a fictional character. And as I mentioned, I was in the care system myself, so maybe that's why it impacted me so much, but chef's kiss. The next book was Good Girl by Aria Aber. This I DNF'd, but it wasn't because I found the book terrible. It was just, I just wasn't enjoying it. Set in Berlin, we follow the hedonistic daughter of Afghan refugees who's struggling to find a place after the loss of a mother. She's grieving. She doesn't know what she wants to do really. She wants to be an artist, but she kind of doesn't want to focus on that at the moment, and she just parties and tries to disassociate from her life and problems. As you can tell, I didn't really enjoy this book, so I DNF'd it. And the reason why, it wasn't because I didn't find the character compelling, but I found the pacing and the repetitiveness of constantly going to the nightclub. It's like, yeah, we get it, you like to party. How many scenes in the nightclub do we need? Because they're starting to blend together. Plus, the artist talk in the book was like really pretentious, and it reminded me of like when you're in university and you meet those pretentious types. Maybe that was intentional, but I just couldn't get into it and I found it a bit of a slog, so I DNF'd it. The next book was The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Written in Ta-Nehisi's signature style, this is a series of essays, and he explores how we tell our own histories and stories throughout time, and how the truth's sometimes shaded or ignored to make it more palatable. In each essay, he travels to different places from Africa, South Carolina, and to Palestine, and it juxtaposes what he expected or was told about the place or his place in it and the realities of being there. It's a call to action on the power of truth and storytelling and how important it is to seek and explore the truth and protect it. I love his writing style, and I found the section on Palestine very moving and currently very relevant in today's society. The next book I read was Liars by Sarah Manguso, a female rage novel if I ever did read one. This is the story of a couple from the start of the relationship, the marriage, to having a child. They're both artists, and it focuses on what they've given up, or in his case, what he hasn't. Told from the wife's point of view, she slowly realises what she's sacrificed and what's been expected of her as a wife and a mother, and how her husband's not sacrificed very much. He benefits from the situation and diminishes her career and prospects, and how she becomes aware of the systemic traps of these heteronormative traditional values and dynamics. This was a pleasant surprise. It is a bit heavy going, but it'll just make you rage, and more people need to read it. The next book I read was Never Lie by Freida McFadden. Another Freida McFadden book, if anyone's shocked. And this is what I mean when I say she churns out the books. because this one was shocking, and not in a good way. A newly engaged couple go to a house viewing and find themselves in a snowstorm, and they get trapped, and they soon realise that they're in the home of a prominent psychologist who mysteriously went missing, and it is suspected that her partner did something bad. But whilst they're at the house, they start snooping around, and the story starts to unravel, the truth if you will. But when the twist happens, it's just so unrealistic, Freida. The characters felt very chat GPT, and I'm like, Freida, we need some quality control. The next book I read was Victorian Psycho by Virginia Feito. Set in Victorian England, we follow a young governess who starts a new job working for a wealthy family in a manor. When strange things start happening, she becomes the suspect, and the fingers start wagging and getting pointed. But what the family don't see is she's sought out to get revenge. This is a gothic horror, and I absolutely loved it. It was so unhinged, it was gross, it was very of its own, not like anything I've really ever read before. Think Amy from Gone Girl meets Patrick Bateman, set in Victorian England in a manor. Okay. The next book I read was Natural Beauty by Ling Huang. A young music prodigy is scouted to work at a high-end exclusive wellness spa, and soon becomes disturbed by the methods of which they practice in the pursuit of youth, beauty and perfection. This is a somewhat satire on beauty and wellness culture. Think Goop and Gwyneth Paltrow and all that nonsense. But it explores themes of identity, beauty, race, class and consumerism. And ever since reading this book, I can't really look at the beauty and wellness industry the same. When the latest sort of fad or trend comes about, it just makes me think of this book. For instance, those TikTok videos of the morning shed where the people are taking all this stuff off the face. It just reminds me of this book. The next book I read was May You Have Delicious Meals by Junko Takase, using food as a metaphor for the gendered expectations in Japanese corporate culture. This book focuses on various members of an office and the gendered expectations and dynamics that they experience day to day, and how they're treated differently based on the gender and the position in the office. I found this book kind of boring, and it focused too much on conversations between the staff, but there was like little substance there. I understand what it was trying to do. It reminded me of wanting to be like a convenience store woman or Diary of a Void, which are two books that do a similar thing, but they do it better. And I just felt like it could have done more since it was a short book. It wasn't really for me, this one. The next book I read was Hunchback by Saou Ichikawa. Set in an assisted living facility, we follow a young woman who has a disability and requires daily help from staff at the place that she lives in. She feels isolated and unable to express herself in person, so she finds solace and expression online, writing about her thoughts and desires on social media platforms. And one day she proposes a deal to one of the care workers who works with her, and the end result could impact her life forever. This is a very unusual story, and it won't be for everyone. It's a puzzle and story. It's got a very open-ended ending, if you will, but it packs a punch in such a short amount of pages, and it's great to see a book giving a voice to people living with disabilities, which we don't hear enough of. I enjoyed this book, and I still regularly think about it. The next book I read was The Housemaid by Freida McFadden. Is this the third book I've read of Freida McFadden's? Rachel, what's going on? Obviously, I wanted something easy to read, and since I was reading a few of her books, I was like, let's see what the hype is about her most popular book. This story follows a young housemaid who moves in with this wealthy family. They seem to live a perfect life, but when strange things start happening in the home, the family she's working for don't appear to be all that they seem. Lots of twists and turns in this one, and I can see why it's a most popular book. It is definitely one that's more gripping and believable than some of the other narratives of hers, but I don't feel like it had me on the edge of my seat as much as I thought. Maybe it was because I kind of guessed what was going to happen. I just never trust any of the characters that are laid out to be the perfect person, because I know that's going to come back. Do you know what I mean? But it did the job, and it was a sort of fun, engaging, twisty read. The next book I read was Fundamentally by Nissaibah Younis. A university lecturer from London gets a job working at the UN in Iraq, trying to de-radicalise ISIS brides, but when she gets there, she realises there's a lot of pencil pushing and box ticking, and she's bitten off a lot more than she can chew, because it seems like she's the only one who wants to actually help these people, and the obstacles she faces, the people people that are in positions of power that are supposed to help seem as if they just want to set up obstacles as opposed to help. So she takes matters into her own hands. I love this book. I found it very fresh, original. It was funny, it was sad, it was witty, and it was also moving in parts too. But it really shows the humanity and the difficulties that people in these jobs face. This will probably be in the top 10 of my favourite books this year, and I highly recommend it. The audiobook was exceptional. Can someone get an Oscar for an audiobook? Because this actress needs to. The next book I read was Deep Cuts by Holly Brickley. Set in the 2000s, we follow two friends who meet one day and bond over their love for music. He's in a band and she's a music journalist, or she wants to be at least. The friends over multiple years, during different points of their lives, they still remain in contact, and there's always something a little bit more than friendship between them, but they don't really want to address it for fear of ruining the friendship. But we follow them grow apart and fall back together again. This felt like a rom-com, but with a bit of indie sleaze and noughties nostalgia. It really had like a MySpace feel to it, so if you were ever a millennial that was on MySpace, I feel like you'll see yourself in this book. The nostalgia just really reminded me of my teenage years when I was into all that indie music and, you know, I wanted to be Alexa Chung. Is it original? Not particularly, but if you want something easy, engaging and nostalgic to read, give this a go. The next book I read was Birding by Rose Ruane. A narrative split in two. We follow two women who are on the cusp of discovering a part of themselves after being in certain relationships and situations in their life. We follow one woman who's one of the members of a 90s pop group. Now she's middle-aged and dealing with the fallout of that part of her life and questioning things in a post-Me Too time period. The relationships, the situationships, the way she was treated by men in the industry, and confronting how she really feels about those moments. And the other is a middle-aged woman who's living in a codependent relationship with a mother, and her mother's kind of emotionally abusive and she's never really sought out life on her own and feels tethered to her mother. I quite enjoyed this book, particularly the first half. I do feel like it lost itself a little bit in the second half and lost its focus a little bit, but it touches on topics of Me Too, codependency, toxic relationships, and I did enjoy the characters, but I found the pacing just didn't sort of fulfill its duty. The next book I read was Margo's Got Money Troubles by Rufi Thorpe. After having an affair with her university professor, Margo falls pregnant, and against the advice of everyone, particularly her mother and the professor, she decides she wants to keep the baby and raise it as a single mother. Her mother's no help, the professor pretends it didn't happen, and she needs a job to provide for herself and the child. So she joins OnlyFans and becomes quite prominent on there in a short space of time. Then her ex-wrestler, addict father, comes to live with her, and he's actually very accepting and helpful with the baby. I really loved this book. It felt very millennial and current, and it also felt very truthful and non-judgmental in the way that it explored sex work and being a single mother at a young age. This was a breath of fresh air. I really loved the working class narrative of trying to make ends meet. I don't feel like we see that enough, and I feel like we need to see more of it. And it's getting adapted into a TV series, and yes, I will be seated for it. Thank you very much. The next book I read was Drive Your Plough Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. Set in a small Polish village, we follow an eccentric older lady who becomes entangled in a investigation into a series of deaths of prominent hunters and men in her community. She has her own theories of what happened. She believes the animals are seeking revenge, and she believes astrology has got something to do with it, but the police just write her off as an eccentric, mad older lady. But really, they should listen to her because she's onto something. This is a literary mystery. It's a bit of a whodunit. It's told from a character that we can't really trust. She's an unreliable narrator, but there's a twist at the end that I was gagged by, and I found the pacing, the character and the payoff just chef's kiss. Absolutely loved this book. The next book I read was Miss March by Virginia Feito. After reading Victorian Psycho, I ran to the library and got this out. Virginia Feito is slowly becoming one of my favourite contemporary authors. This follows a wealthy upper class woman whose husband's a writer, and he's just written and released a very popular book that has a character at the centre that people seem to think is inspired by her, but she's not taking it as a compliment because this character's a bit uncouth, should we say. As she delves into the basis of this character and if there's any truth to it, she starts to lose touch with reality, and her and the character merge together and she falls into a bit of psychosis. This is a psychological story with thriller elements, and it ends in a twist in which our protagonist loses touch with her sanity, and I really didn't see the end coming and I was left guessing until the last page. I absolutely ate it up. Highly recommend. The next book I read was Audition by Katie Kitamura. I listened to this on audiobook. This is about an actress who is rehearsing for a theatre production when a young man turns up one day and claims to be her son, which she can't see how because she doesn't believe she ever had a son. And it's a dual narrative. In the second narrative, we experience life where this young man is her son. So it's like, are we in two different realities? It sounds good on paper, but I'm just going to say I was confused. I don't know if it was because it was the audiobook. I was on board with the first half, but the second half just sort of lost me and I was completely confused about what was going on. And I really just found the second half of the book just completely confusing and bewildering. At the end of the book as well, I failed to see the central point of why we were having the dual narrative, and I found it hard to connect to the characters because I didn't really know what was real. I have her other book, Intimacy, so I hope I enjoyed that one a lot more than this. The next book I read was Long Bright River by Liz Moore. As you can see, if I enjoy a book by an author, I'll usually go back in their back catalogue and read one of their other books, and this is the case with Liz Moore. This is set in Philadelphia. We follow a young female police officer who becomes involved in a series of murders of sex workers in the Philadelphia area. They suspect a serial killer's on the loose and targeting sex workers, and when her sister goes missing, she starts to panic and becomes worried that her sister may be one of the victims. This book tackles police corruption, addiction and the opioid crisis in America and how family trauma carries on through different generations. I enjoyed this one a lot, and I'd actually go on and say I preferred it to God of the Woods because it had sort of like a gritty quality to it, which I prefer. And there is a mini-series with Amanda Seyfried that I also watched and loved too. The next book I read was We Could Be Rats by Emily Austen. This follows the relationship of two sisters in a letter sort of retelling format of one of the sisters who's struggling with depression, and she's writing essentially a goodbye letter to a sister because she's thinking of ending her. Laced with dark humour, this book touches on sibling dynamics, family trauma, the deteriorating mental health of one woman. I found this funny, moving and touching and a very realistic portrayal of mental health. It reminded me in a lot of ways of the book Sad Janet, which I also really liked. That's kind of under the umbrella of a depression comedy, and I think this probably falls under that one too. But I'll definitely be checking out more of Emily Austen's books because I really enjoyed my time with this one. The next book I read was Madonna in a Fur Coat by Sabatina Ali, a love story of extreme pining if there ever was one. We follow a young Turkish man who moves to Berlin and becomes besotted with a young artist who he calls Madonna in a Fur Coat. A love affair ensues and it's intense and all-encompassing as young love is, until he has to go back home for a family emergency and the future of their relationship is uncertain. Will they make it? Will they reunite? Can their love affair last even though they're in two different places? And how will this one moment impact the rest of their lives? This is a beautiful, aching, romantic love story about love and loss. Adored. The next book I read read was I Want to Die But I Still Want to Eat Tteokbokki by Baek Shihei. In this continuation of the first book, it's in the same format of the young woman talking to her psychiatrist. We follow the highs and lows and her continued journey of working on her mental health and her dedication to working through her problems with her therapist and trying to understand herself better. Did this book need to be written? No. I understand it was written because the first book was massively popular and it doesn't really add anything new to the first one. It's not really doing anything different. It's just a continuation. I will say that I think this book does have importance in that it's shining light on mental health and destigmatising going to therapy and showing that people do suffer and struggle with the mental health and it's not something to be ashamed of. So I do appreciate it in that sense. And if you were a fan of the first one, why not read this one? The next book I read was Slags by Emma Jane Unsworth. Two sisters who grow up in 90s Manchester reunite to go on a 40th birthday trip around the Scottish Highlands to celebrate and have some sibling time together. It's a split narrative between past and present and how their lives were shaped by the past and how they see it differently now. We have two dynamic, flawed female characters and they're laced with humour and depth. I really enjoyed the northern setting of this, and even though I was only a baby in the 90s, I still felt very tethered to the world they were writing about. And it does touch on some darker themes, but the main point is sort of reclaiming the memory and the attitude of how women are treated in time and society and how we need to be a bit kinder to ourselves than how we tend to be when we're younger. The next book I read was The Tenant by Freida McFadden. Oh look, another Freida McFadden book. How did that get in there? But Freida, this one really should have stayed in the drafts. I'm sorry, sweetheart, but it should have. A young couple who fall on hard times when the man loses his job, taking a tenant who seems nice on the surface, but then she starts psychologically torturing the husband. Or does she? Something sinister's afoot in this household. This takes Gaslight Gatekeep Girl Boss to a whole new level. This one felt like it lacked a bit of originality to me. I felt like I'd read this narrative before. The twist was really unrealistic and had me rolling my eyes. But what can I say? Her books are like watching a bad episode of reality TV sometimes and I can't look away. But yeah, Freida needs some quality control. We need to get some quality control. The next book I read was You Had to Be There by Jodie Harsh. A hedonistic trip through noughties queer London. This is a memoir by the drag artist and DJ Jodie Harsh. It's a compulsively readable romp about her queer awakening in the club scene in noughties London, the places that once were and how they formed her into the person she is today. They were her saviour but also her destruction. As funny and nostalgic it is raw and honest, Jodie packs no punches and bears all in this book, and she touches on her journey to sobriety. I loved this book. I found it funny, engaging. It was just a romp, and in many ways it reminded me of Julia Fox's memoir Down the Drain in how raw, open and honest it was. And if a memoir's not honest and truthful and bears all, I just don't think it's worth reading, because who wants to read a guarded memoir? Not me. The next book I read was Sky Daddy by Kate Folk. A love story between woman and aeroplane. A woman who works a mundane job in a social media company feels apathetic about her life and longs for one thing: to fall in love with an aeroplane. Now, I'm not just talking about a mere interest in the mechanics here. I'm talking full-blown sexual attraction to aeroplanes. I'm just going to let you sit with that for a moment. So yeah, this is very weird girl lit and the definition of original, but I really liked this one. I thought it was obviously very weird and unusual, but the character just felt very realistic and I quite liked my time with her. The way she talks about it makes it seem not that weird, to be quite honest. It was moving and hilarious at times, but it's a fun read that'll definitely be one of the weirder books you may pick up this year. The next book I read was Pixel Flesh, How Toxic Beauty Culture Harms Women by Ellen Atlanta. An exploration of how toxic beauty culture and the beauty industry is and how it preys on our insecurities as young women, how the ever-growing landscape is changing and the expectations of how we're supposed to look, not age, get our faces injected, and how the goalposts are forever moving and beauty standards are becoming less and less attainable unless you're uber wealthy. And in our social media obsessed culture, this book questions how we see ourselves, the constant comparison, the expensive procedures, and how we make people who benefit and profit off this obscene standard, the Kardashians, are wreaking havoc on young women's sense of self. And particularly it takes a look at young women in the digital age and on social media. As fascinating as it is enraging, this is a book I think everyone should read, particularly if you're a young woman on social media in any sense. The next book I read was To the Moon by Jang Woo Jin, a Korean bestseller about a group of friends who work mundane office jobs for a confectionery company. They're living paycheck to paycheck, they're struggling to make ends meet in Korea's society, and no matter how much they try and scrimp and save, it's never enough. They can't get out of this cycle of poverty. That's until one day when they get into cryptocurrency and they decide to invest their life savings, and they're not aware of what their end goal will be. Will they lose all the money, or will they become really rich and wealthy and change their lives forever? I appreciated the angle and discussion of class, capitalism and consumerist society that benefits the wealthy and makes working class people struggle, but this felt a bit flat for me and it got a bit repetitive. The focus on the cryptocurrency talk was just really boring, and I wanted more of the thoughts and the daily living of the women in the centre of this story. So yeah, this just fell a bit flat for me and it didn't really give. The next book I read was Hard Copy by Fionn Veldman, another weird girl lit book about a woman who works in a mundane office job as an office assistant, and she forms an emotional bond and attachment to her printer. Now, I know it's sounding a lot like Sky Daddy, but it's very much of its own, this book. Yeah, they share similar themes, but this one's a bit more about feeling lost, a loss of self, not knowing what you want to do with your life, feeling a sense of being untethered from life and friendships. And I found this story quite moving. I didn't think I'd be one to feel upset for a printer, but here we are. I really liked it, what can I say? And the final book I've read so far this year is Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry, the latest instalment from our rom-com queen Emily Henry. We follow two writers who are vying for the same job to write the tell-all biography of a once famous it girl from a very prominent family who's become a recluse and doesn't speak to the press. She's gone into hiding essentially, and it's told in a dual narrative of present day and the reclusive it girl's story, but it's still got its foot in classic Emily Henry, as the two writers are essentially enemies but then they start getting feelings for each other, so it's still tethered in that genre, but Emily's trying to do something a bit different, and I can tell she's trying to, you know, stretch or flex her writing muscles and go into a bit of a new territory. Although it wasn't my favourite Emily Henry, I did like that aspect of it, and she's doing something different. It's not just copy and paste, and I really needed this after being in a bit of a reading slump the last month, so I ate it up. So there's all the books that I've read so far this year. Obviously I'm still trying to meet my reading goal, and I'm on course to meet my 50 book goal, but let me know in the comments if you've read any of these, what you thought. If you made it this far into the video, let me know in the comments what's been your favourite read so far this year, and maybe if I haven't read it, I'll check it out. If you liked this video, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, because it really helps me and the channel out. I appreciate you all. Hope you enjoyed the video. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!